The first time I saw her laugh with him, I almost didn't recognize her. It wasn't because she looked different. No, she looked the same, maybe even more beautiful than I remembered. But it was the way she laughed. The carefree, almost playful sound that echoed across the room, something that used to be reserved for me. I hadn't heard that laugh in months. I watched them from the doorway. The soft hum of the party around me faded as I focused on her. It was an office gathering, casual, just a few drinks, some light conversation, nothing out of the ordinary. Or so I thought. My wife, Melanie, had always been the life of the party, but tonight, something was different. She was standing next to Adam, her colleague, a little too close. Their conversation was lively, a little too intimate for my liking. She threw her head back, laughing, the sound of it piercing my chest. I wasn't supposed to be here. I knew that. I had promised her I wouldn't crash her office party. It's just work, babe, she had said earlier that evening. You stay home, relax. But something didn't sit right with me. A week had passed since Melanie started coming home late every night. A week of excuses. Work's been crazy, she would say, and I'd buy it because I trusted her. But tonight, something was nagging at me, an intuition I couldn't shake off. I had to know what was going on. So, I showed up unannounced, just standing by the entrance, pretending to be lost in the crowd. I had no plan, no strategy. I just had to see for myself. I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Her gaze met mine across the room. For a moment, everything froze. I don't know if it was the alcohol or the exhaustion, but it felt like time slowed down. She looked at me, and I saw it. The slightest hesitation in her eyes before she quickly turned back to Adam, forcing a smile as if nothing was wrong. But I saw it, that split-second moment where she felt exposed. Her laugh died in her throat. I should have walked up to her, confronted her right there. But I didn't. I stood there, glued to the spot, heart racing. Adam was laughing too, completely oblivious to me, his arm casually resting on the back of her chair. That arm, that touch, was all it took for me to feel the pit of anger grow inside me. She looked at him, then back at me, but this time, her smile was different. It wasn't the soft, warm smile I had come to know over the years. No, it was tight, forced. Her lips curved, but there was no warmth behind it. I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers clutched the edge of her drink a little too tightly. And then I did something I didn't plan on doing. I walked up to them, slowly, stepping into their bubble, not knowing what I was about to say or do, but feeling an overwhelming need to be heard. As I approached, Adam greeted me with a grin. Hey, Gary, didn't know you were joining us tonight. Melanie didn't look at me. She kept her gaze fixed on the table in front of her, as though I weren't even standing there. I forced a smile, but it felt like a mask. Yeah, just thought I'd drop by. She finally met my eyes, her expression unreadable. Gary, what are you doing here? I didn't answer her. Instead, I reached down, grabbed her wine glass, and placed it back on the table with a little more force than necessary. The sound of the glass hitting the table snapped her out of her trance. Her eyes widened. Why don't you tell me, Melanie? I said, my voice low, calm, and yet full of an emotion I wasn't ready to face. Why don't you tell me what's been going on? Adam looked back and forth between us, sensing the sudden tension, but he didn't move. He stood there, smug and oblivious, thinking everything was fine. Melanie opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her lips trembled, and for a moment, I saw her as the woman I used to know, the one who would talk through everything, who would never leave me in the dark. Instead, she glanced at Adam, then at me, her face a mix of confusion and guilt. Gary, I don't know what you think, but this isn't what it looks like. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Then what is it, Melanie? I was shaking now, my voice rising, a lump in my throat. Tell me. Because I'm standing here, watching you laugh with him. This man you've been working late with. This man who's suddenly your closest friend. So what is it? What am I supposed to think? The room was quiet now. The party had become a distant hum, the chatter and laughter of the crowd blending into the background. It was just the three of us in that moment, locked in a silent war of words that none of us seemed ready to fight. Melanie's face turned pale, her hands fidgeting at her sides. Adam, sensing the growing tension, cleared his throat and awkwardly took a step back, but still, he didn't leave. He just stood there, watching the unraveling of something he had no business being a part of. I looked at her one more time. The woman I had shared my life with, the woman I trusted. And in that instant, I realized that the woman I once knew might not be standing in front of me at all. And just like that, the reality of it all hit me. This wasn't just about an affair or betrayal. It was about everything that had been building up for months. The distance, the late nights, the lies. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the quiet unraveling of the life I thought I had. Without saying another word, I turned and walked out of the room. I stepped out of that room, feeling like the world had just shifted under my feet. The laughter and chatter from the party didn't reach me anymore, and I was alone in my thoughts, standing outside the building as the cold night air hit my face. My mind was racing, replaying everything over and over again. Melanie's forced smile, her hesitation when she saw me, the way she kept looking at Adam like she didn't want me to know something I already knew. I don't know how long I stood there, lost in my thoughts, trying to make sense of the mess I had just walked into. All I knew was that something was terribly wrong. And it wasn't just the affair. No, that wasn't it. It was something deeper. It was the feeling that I had been living in a lie for months, maybe even years, and I had let myself be blinded by my own trust. The worst part was that I wasn't even angry yet. I wasn't screaming or lashing out. I was just numb. I finally pulled myself together and got into my car. As I started the engine, I could feel the weight of the decision I was about to make. I had a choice: go home and pretend like everything was fine, or face the truth, whatever it was. But deep down, I knew I couldn't let this go. Not now. Not after everything I had seen tonight. By the time I got home, the house was quiet. Melanie's car wasn't in the driveway, and I felt an odd sense of relief. Maybe she was staying at a friend's place, or maybe she was at Adam's. But either way, I was alone with my thoughts again, and this time, I wasn't running from them. I went inside and sat on the couch, staring at the walls. The silence felt suffocating. I tried calling her once, twice, but each time, it went straight to voicemail. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was going on, it wasn't going to be easy to fix. I thought about her for a long time, about how we used to be. The late-night talks, the plans we made, the quiet moments that made me believe that we had something real. And now, it felt like all of it had been a mirage, a carefully constructed lie. It was almost too much to comprehend, but I had to face it. She had been with him, and it wasn't just one time. The messages on her phone, the way she acted, there was no way I could deny it anymore. But what hurt the most was how casually she had dismissed it, as if I were overreacting, as if I had no right to question her. It was as if she knew I would just stand there and take it. And I had. I had stood there, speechless, watching her laugh with him, and said nothing. But now, I was done being the quiet, complacent husband. I needed answers. I needed to know what had changed. Around midnight, the front door creaked open, and I heard the soft sound of footsteps in the hallway. My heart skipped a beat, and I immediately knew it was Melanie. I didn't move. I stayed seated, my eyes fixed on the doorway. She stopped in her tracks when she saw me sitting there. "Gary," she said, her voice soft but cautious, like she wasn't sure how to approach me. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. Instead, I stood up slowly, my gaze never leaving hers. I was tired of being the man who waited for the truth to come to him. This time, I was going to get it, one way or another. "You need to explain yourself," I said, my voice steady but colder than I had intended. "I'm done being the fool, Melanie." She flinched, as if my words had struck her harder than I thought. She opened her mouth, but then closed it again, unsure of what to say. I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered, almost pleading. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way." "You're right. It wasn't supposed to happen this way," I replied, my voice cutting through the air. "But it did. And now I need you to be honest with me. What the hell has been going on between you and Adam? How long has this been happening?" She stood there, looking like she was trying to process what I had just said. Her lips parted, but she still didn't speak. And in that silence, I realized something. I was done waiting for her to say the right thing. I had waited too long for the truth, and now it was time for me to force it out. "I saw you tonight," I continued, my heart pounding in my chest. "I saw the way you laughed with him. I saw the way you looked at him, the way you let him touch you. Don't stand here and tell me nothing is going on. I know better." For a moment, she looked like she might break down, but then she stiffened. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, her face hardening. "You think you know everything, don't you, Gary?" Her words came out sharp, as if they were laced with venom. Well, you don't. You don't know anything. You've been so busy trying to keep the peace, trying to be the good husband, that you've ignored everything that's been right in front of your face. Her words hit me like a slap, and for the first time, I felt a surge of anger. Don't you dare blame this on me. I spat, my fists clenching at my sides. I trusted you. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me? She looked away, avoiding my gaze. I never meant to hurt you, she repeated, almost like she was trying to convince herself. But I'm not the same person you married. I don't want this life anymore. The words hit me harder than any punch could. I didn't know what to say. So what now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Are you telling me this is over? That you've been lying to me all this time, and now you just want to walk away? She didn't respond right away. Instead, she took a step toward the door, her back to me. I'm sorry, Gary, but I think it's time for both of us to move on. And with that, she walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, broken, as the door clicked shut behind her. The silence in the house felt deafening after Melanie left. I stood there, frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. It was like the world had stopped spinning, and all I could hear was the thudding of my own heartbeat. I didn't know how long I stayed in the same spot, but by the time I came back to my senses, my legs were sore, and the sharp sting of betrayal had settled deep within my chest. I paced the living room, running my hands through my hair, trying to make sense of everything. It had been a slow burn, this unraveling of my life. Little things at first, Melanie's late nights, the way she'd go out with her friends more often, the texts I didn't see but knew were there. But tonight, everything had changed. The truth was staring me right in the face, and now I couldn't ignore it anymore. She was gone, and with her went the life I thought I knew. I sank into the couch, my mind a blur. The anger I'd felt earlier was starting to morph into something more hollow, more resigned. What was I supposed to do now? How was I supposed to move on when everything I had built, every little piece of trust, every moment we shared, had been shattered? The thought of Adam kept coming back to me. His smug smile, the way he stood too close to Melanie, as if he had every right to be there. I didn't know much about him, but I knew enough to understand that he wasn't just her friend. No man looks at a woman the way he looked at her without wanting more. And what hurt the most wasn't just that she was with him. It was that she had lied to me for so long, and now, she was walking away without a second thought. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 2 a.m., but I couldn't sleep. The adrenaline from the confrontation was still pumping through me, and my mind was racing. I needed answers. I needed closure. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my coat, put on my shoes, and left the house. The city was quiet at this hour, the streets eerily empty. I didn't know where I was going at first, but as I drove, the road seemed to pull me toward her office building. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Why was I doing this? Was I really going to confront her at this hour? What was I hoping to achieve? I pulled up to the building, the lights still on in her office. The faint glow from the windows seemed like a beacon in the dark. I parked across the street, watching. I don't know why I thought she'd still be there. Maybe I wanted to see her face one last time before I completely lost her. Maybe I wanted to see the woman I thought I knew, the woman I thought I could trust, and figure out if there was any piece of her left. And then I saw it. The unmistakable figure of Melanie, stepping out of the building. She wasn't alone. Adam was with her. They were walking side by side, talking softly, their laughter carrying across the street. It was like a punch to the gut. My vision blurred for a second as the world seemed to tilt on its axis. I should have turned away. I should have driven off and left them to whatever they were doing. But I didn't. I watched as they got into Adam's car together, the way she leaned into him as he opened the door for her. I wanted to scream, to run across the street and confront them both, but I stayed still. Part of me wanted to confront her right then, demand answers in the most brutal way possible. But another part of me, some small, distant part of me, just wanted to understand. To understand why she had chosen him over me, why she had lied to my face, why she was walking away so easily. I sat there for what felt like hours, my eyes glued to the car as it disappeared down the street. The weight of everything she had done to me was starting to crush me, and I couldn't breathe. Was this really happening? Was I really watching the woman I loved drive away with another man? Eventually, I couldn't stay there anymore. The tears I had been holding back finally broke free, and I turned the car around and drove aimlessly, hoping the road would take me somewhere, Anywhere. That wasn't here. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the first rays of sunlight were starting to creep over the horizon. I didn't know how long I'd been gone, but it didn't matter. The night was over, and so was my marriage. I sat in my car for a few moments, staring at the house, at the life I used to have. The silence inside the house was louder now, almost suffocating. The door Melanie had walked out of was still open, as if waiting for her return. But I knew she wouldn't be coming back. Not tonight, not ever. I got out of the car and walked into the house, my mind numb. The weight of what had just happened was still too much for me to fully process. But one thing was clear. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about the woman I loved, had been a lie. I took a deep breath and glanced at the kitchen table, where our wedding photos were scattered. It was all so real, so final. And then I realized something else. This wasn't just about Melanie or Adam. This was about me, too. I had let this happen. I had let myself believe the lies. I had allowed myself to be the nice guy, the patient, trusting husband. But in the end, that didn't protect me. And now, I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I didn't recognize. I didn't know what I was going to do next. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to stay here and wait for the woman who had already chosen someone else. I grabbed my keys, walked out the door, and left the house behind. The first thing I did after walking out of the house was drive. I didn't have a destination in mind. I didn't know where I was going, but all I could feel was the overwhelming need to escape. Escape from the suffocating reality of my home, of my life, that had just come crashing down around me. As the miles passed by, my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, none of them clear, none of them making sense. Melanie had left me for him, Adam. The name itself made my blood boil, a cold fire igniting in the pit of my stomach every time I thought about it. But as much as I wanted to hate him, I couldn't stop thinking about her. About how she had looked at me with pity in her eyes when she walked out of the house. About how she hadn't even tried to fight for what we had. And it hurt. It hurt more than anything I had ever felt. The road stretched ahead, the headlights of my car cutting through the darkness. But the further I drove, the more distant the world seemed. I didn't know where to go, but for the first time in years, I didn't care. There was nothing for me back at the house. Nothing for me in the life I had spent so long building with Melanie. By the time I reached the outskirts of the city, I found myself in front of a quiet bar I used to visit when I was younger, before Melanie and I settled down, before life became predictable. It was a dive bar, dark and worn, the kind of place that didn't ask questions. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, staring at the neon sign flickering above the entrance. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I needed something, anything, that could dull the pain, even if just for a few hours. I pushed open the door and walked in, the smell of stale beer and cheap whiskey filling the air. The place was nearly empty, save for a few regulars hunched over their drinks at the bar. The bartender, a middle-aged man with a scar across his cheek, looked up as I walked in. "What can I get you?" he asked, his voice gruff but neutral. I didn't know what I wanted. I wasn't here for a drink, not really. But I ordered a whiskey anyway, something strong to steady my shaking hands. I took the glass, the burn of the alcohol doing little to numb the ache inside me. It was almost like my body was trying to catch up with my mind. As I sat at the bar, nursing the drink, I let my thoughts drift back to that night. I had confronted Melanie, and I'd thought I was ready for whatever she threw at me. But nothing prepared me for how quickly she had turned on me. The look in her eyes when she told me she didn't want this life anymore. It was like she had been planning this for a long time, like the decision had already been made. And I had never seen it coming. How had I not seen the signs? How had I let her slip away so easily? The sound of a chair scraping against the floor snapped me out of my thoughts. I glanced up to see a man sitting down beside me. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place where I had seen him before. He wore a leather jacket, his hair slightly longer than most men would dare to wear, and his eyes were dark, almost too intense for comfort. He ordered a drink, but I didn't think much of him. That is, until he spoke. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, almost like he was expecting me to tell him everything. I looked at him, not sure if I was in the mood for conversation. "Something like that," I muttered, taking another sip from my glass. He didn't seem to mind the coldness in my response. He just sat there, studying me for a moment. "You know," he said, leaning in slightly, "sometimes it's better to let go of the things that hurt you." His voice was steady, almost too calm, like he was talking from experience. People lie. They always do. And sometimes, you have to stop fighting for them. I looked at him, confused. And what if I don't want to let go? What if I'm not ready to walk away? He shrugged, his eyes never leaving mine. Then you'll keep hurting yourself. But hey, it's your life. You do what you want with it. I wasn't sure what he was trying to say, but something about his words struck a chord with me. You sound like you've been there, I said, more curious than anything. He smiled slightly, a knowing smile. Been there? I've been everywhere, my friend. Sometimes you just have to walk away from the things that break you. You can't fix everything, especially not when the other person doesn't even want to try. I stared at him, feeling like the world had just shifted again. How was it that this stranger seemed to understand my pain better than I did? I wanted to argue, to say that there had to be a way to fix it, but the words didn't come. Because deep down, I knew he was right. There was no fixing it. Not anymore. I finished my drink and stood up, suddenly feeling like the weight of the world had been lifted, just a little bit. I looked at the man, gave him a half-hearted nod, and walked toward the door. The night air hit me again, colder this time, but I didn't mind. It felt different now, like the numbness was starting to fade, replaced by something else. A sense of finality. I had to let go. There was nothing left for me to fight for. I drove home in a daze, the streets blurring around me. When I pulled up to the house, I didn't even bother to park in the driveway. I just sat in the car, staring at the dark windows, wondering what had gone so wrong. The door was still open, but the emptiness inside felt more suffocating than ever. I couldn't stay here any longer, not in this house that was now just a shell of what it once was. I grabbed my bag, shoved some clothes inside, and walked out. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what the future held. But I knew this, whatever was ahead of me, I wasn't going to keep chasing the past. And maybe, just maybe, I could finally start moving forward. The days after I left the house felt like I was living in a fog. I stayed at a cheap motel for a few nights, just enough time for my mind to process everything, though it never truly sank in. I still couldn't believe what had happened. Melanie, the woman I thought I knew inside and out, had walked away from me without a second glance. And the worst part was how easily she did it. There was no fight, no tearful goodbye. It was as if I was a chapter in her life she could simply close without a second thought. I hadn't heard from her since that night. She didn't call, didn't send a message to check if I was okay. The silence was deafening. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would race for a split second, hoping it was her. But it was never her. Just random texts, work-related emails, spam, everything except the one thing I was craving most. Answers. I found myself wandering the streets, driving aimlessly without a real destination. It was like I was trying to outrun the gnawing feeling in my chest, the suffocating emptiness that had replaced the life I used to know. I couldn't remember the last time I felt genuinely happy, and even the thought of calling a friend or family member felt foreign. What would I even say? Hey, my wife left me for another guy? I didn't want to be that guy, the one who couldn't handle his own life. But in that moment, I felt completely lost. One evening, after another long and uneventful drive, I found myself sitting at the bar of a different place this time. It was dimly lit, not as run down as the last one, but it still had that same no questions asked kind of vibe. I ordered a drink and sat at a corner booth, trying to blend into the background. I wasn't looking for company. I wasn't looking for anything. I just needed to fill the empty space for a little while longer. The bartender, who I'd noticed had been watching me closely for the past few minutes, finally walked over. He was young, maybe in his late 20s, with messy brown hair and a friendly smile that seemed oddly familiar. Rough day? He asked casually, though his tone made it clear he wasn't just asking for the sake of small talk. I looked up at him, surprised by how much I wanted to say something. Yeah, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. You could say that. He raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing that I wasn't just talking about a bad day at work. You want to talk about it? His voice wasn't forceful, but there was something in the way he said it that made me feel like he actually cared. I chuckled bitterly, shaking my head. What's there to talk about? My life's a mess. My wife left me, and I don't know why. I've got nothing left but the pieces of a life I can't put back together. He nodded, like he understood, and leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. I get it, he said quietly. It sucks when the person you thought you knew turns out to be someone completely different. But sometimes, people walk away because they've got their own shit to deal with. Doesn't make it right, but it's the truth. I felt a strange weight lift off my shoulders as he spoke. It wasn't that he had all the answers, or that his words made everything magically better, but for the first time in days, someone acknowledged my pain. And that made all the difference. I leaned forward, my elbows resting on the table. "You ever been there?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You ever have someone you thought you could trust turn their back on you?" The bartender's smile faded slightly, and he let out a long sigh. "Yeah," he said, his voice softer now. "I've been there. It sucks, man. But you've got to remember, you can't control other people's actions. You can only control how you deal with them." I sat back, taking a long sip from my drink, letting his words sink in. Maybe he was right. Maybe I couldn't control what Melanie had done, but I could control what came next. I could stop drowning in the past and start figuring out how to move forward. As the night wore on, the conversation turned to lighter topics, and I found myself laughing at some of his jokes. It was a strange relief to be able to laugh again, even if just for a little while. But deep down, I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. Eventually, I had to face the truth. Melanie was gone, and I had to let her go. I wasn't ready to forgive her yet, not by a long shot, but I knew holding on to the anger and resentment wasn't going to get me anywhere. I had to move on. By the time I left the bar, I felt a little lighter. The weight on my chest wasn't gone, but it had lessened. I could breathe again. I didn't know what was ahead of me, but for the first time in days, I had a glimpse of hope. I wasn't alone in this. Maybe the world had a way of testing you, of throwing obstacles in your path, but that didn't mean you had to let it defeat you. As I got into my car, I realized something that hadn't fully clicked before. The life I had with Melanie wasn't just about her. It was about me, too. I had spent so much of my life bending over backward to make her happy, to fix everything for her, that I had forgotten about myself. Now, I was the one who needed to fix things. I wasn't going to let this define me. I didn't know where I was going, but it didn't matter. Wherever the road took me, I was ready. The past was behind me, and it was time to step into the unknown, to rebuild, to find my own path. I was done being the guy who waited around. It was time to move on. And whatever came next, I was going to face it head on. The days after I left the bar were a blur. I'd never realized how much one person's absence could shift the entire landscape of your world until I was forced to live without Melanie. Every corner of the house felt empty. Her side of the bed, the space in the kitchen where her coffee mug usually sat. These things that used to seem so normal, so insignificant, now felt like monuments to a life I no longer recognized. I kept trying to stay busy, trying to distract myself from the silence that had settled in every room, but it was impossible to escape. I found myself going back to places I used to visit, like the old cafe down the street where we'd spent hours talking about our dreams for the future. It felt almost like a cruel joke now, standing there by myself, remembering the laughter we shared and the promises we made. I couldn't help but think about the fact that she was probably out there, living her life with Adam, someone who had taken my place so easily. I tried not to let jealousy consume me, but it did. Every thought of them together made me feel like I was suffocating, and the only thing I could do was push those thoughts away, one at a time. I went through the motions, work, eating, sleeping, but everything felt hollow. Even the small things that used to bring me joy, watching a movie, reading a book, going for a walk, lost their meaning. It wasn't that I was incapable of enjoying life anymore. It was that I simply didn't know how to enjoy it without her by my side. I didn't know how to rebuild a life that had been destroyed so suddenly. But that was the key, wasn't it? Rebuilding. As much as I hated the idea, I knew I had to start somewhere. And so, I made the decision. I needed to face her. I couldn't keep living like this, consumed by anger and regret. If I wanted to move on, I had to have closure. I couldn't let her walk away without at least understanding why. I had to ask the questions that had been burning inside me. The questions I had been too afraid to ask before. The questions that had festered ever since that night at the party. I found myself standing outside her apartment building a few days later, the evening sky a dark velvet blanket above me. My heart was pounding in my chest, the anticipation of what I was about to do almost paralyzing. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, apologies, explanations, a confrontation that would finally bring everything into the light. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to leave without answers. I took a deep breath before I pushed the buzzer for her apartment. The sound echoed in the silence, and I had a brief moment of doubt. What if she wasn't there? What if she didn't want to talk to me? But the door clicked open, and a few moments later, there she was. Melanie. She looked different, distant, as if she'd aged a few years in the short time since we last spoke. Her hair was messier than usual, and there was a tiredness in her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. She stood there for a moment, just staring at me, as if trying to decide whether to let me in or slam the door in my face. Finally, she stepped aside. "I didn't think you'd actually come," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Neither did I muttered, stepping past her into the apartment. It felt strange to be here again, surrounded by the remnants of our life together. Pictures on the walls, her favorite books scattered across the coffee table, the faint scent of her perfume still lingering in the air. Everything was so familiar, yet everything felt foreign. She closed the door behind me, but neither of us spoke for a long moment. It was like we were both waiting for the other to break the silence, but neither of us knew where to start. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking a little as I turned to face her. "Why did you do this? Why did you leave?" Her eyes flickered with something. Guilt, perhaps, or maybe sadness, but she quickly masked it. She sighed, running her fingers through her hair, her body language defensive. "I don't know, Gary," she said, almost sounding apologetic. I don't have a good answer for you. Don't lie to me." I shot back, my words sharper than I intended. "I saw it in your eyes the moment I confronted you. You had already made up your mind. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision." She flinched, but there was no denying the truth of my words. "No," she said quietly, looking down at her hands. "It wasn't." I took a step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. "Then tell me, Melanie. Tell me what happened. What did I do wrong?" Her shoulders sagged, and she looked at me, finally meeting my gaze. "It's not that you did anything wrong," she said softly. "It's just, I don't know. I changed. I grew. And somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't the person you married anymore. I didn't know how to tell you." "You couldn't tell me?" I asked, my voice low, the pain creeping into my chest again. "You couldn't tell me that you were falling out of love with me? That you were choosing someone else?" "I didn't choose him, Gary," she replied quickly, as if the words themselves were painful. "But I felt alive with him. I felt like I could breathe again. With you, it was comfortable. But comfortable isn't enough anymore." The words hit me like a slap. It wasn't enough? Was that really how she saw it? The life we had built together, the years we spent, the love we shared. It was all just comfortable to her? My mind struggled to comprehend what she was saying. I didn't know if I was angry, hurt, or both. "I don't know what to say," I muttered, feeling like I was suffocating. "I gave you everything, Melanie. And this is how you repay me? By walking away without even trying?" She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, there was a tear running down her cheek. "I didn't want to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you. But I was already gone, Gary. I just couldn't admit it to myself. I didn't know how to fix it, and I didn't think I could ask you to fix it either." For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her. I had spent so long searching for answers, so long hoping that somehow we could fix things, that I hadn't seen the truth staring me in the face. She was already gone, and no amount of fighting, no amount of begging, would bring her back. I took a step back, my chest heavy with the weight of her words. "Then I guess this is it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're done." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes, but she didn't say anything more. And in that moment, I realized there was nothing more to say. I turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving behind the woman I once loved and the life I thought I would have forever. The walk back to my car felt like I was dragging an invisible weight behind me. I didn't even remember walking down the stairs from her apartment. My feet just moved on their own, propelled by a mix of shock and resignation. My mind was in a haze, replaying everything Melanie had said, her words echoing in my head like a song I couldn't shake off, a song that had once been beautiful, but now felt like the soundtrack to my downfall. I reached the parking lot and got into my car without a second thought, the engine starting on its own as I pulled away from the curb. I had no clear destination in mind, but I drove anyway, the streets blurring past me in a monotonous stretch of lights and shadows. I felt hollow inside, like a shell that had been emptied out, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had been irrevocably altered. Melanie's words were haunting me. She hadn't chosen Adam, she said. She didn't want to hurt me. But all I could hear was the part where she admitted she had been gone long before she actually left. That was the cruelest part, knowing that she had already checked out of the marriage before the door had even closed behind her. How was I supposed to live with that? I ended up at the edge of town, near a small park where I used to go when I needed to think. I parked my car and sat there for a while, just staring at the dark trees and the empty benches. It was quiet, too quiet, but I needed this stillness, this moment alone, to breathe. The air was cold, and it seemed to bite at my skin, but I welcomed it. The cold was better than the suffocating heat of all the emotions crashing over me. I needed to think, to make sense of everything. What now? That was the question that kept running through my mind. What the hell was I supposed to do now? I had been living a lie, had been wrapped up in a fantasy of a happy marriage while everything around me was crumbling. And the worst part was, I hadn't seen it coming. Melanie had kept everything hidden so well, and I had just accepted it. I had trusted her with everything I had, and she had taken it all and left. I didn't know how long I stayed there, lost in my thoughts, but when I finally glanced at the clock on my dashboard, I saw it was already past midnight. I should have gone home, but I couldn't bring myself to face that empty house again. I couldn't face the life I thought I was living. But there was something else, something I wasn't ready to confront. What about Adam? What was it about him that made her choose him over me? Was it just that she had grown tired of me? Or had she found something in him that I couldn't give her? Was it even about me at all? Or was it just her own need to escape, to find something new? I knew I couldn't sit here forever, brooding in the dark. I had to face the reality of it all. Melanie had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. I couldn't keep living in the past, replaying the same scenes over and over again. I had to move forward, even if that meant starting from scratch. I turned the key in the ignition and started driving again, this time with a clearer sense of purpose. The roads seemed endless, but they weren't empty. I wasn't sure where I was headed, but for the first time in weeks, I wasn't completely lost. Maybe I was heading toward something better. The thought of moving on was daunting. How could I rebuild my life when the foundation had been ripped out from under me? But as I drove, I realized that maybe this was my chance to be someone different, someone better. I didn't need to keep living in the shadow of a failed marriage. I didn't need to keep holding on to something that was already gone. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Letting go of Melanie wasn't going to be as simple as walking away. I would carry the scars of what happened for a long time. But I could choose how I healed. I could choose to learn from this, to become stronger. By the time I got home, the sun was just starting to rise. I stood in front of my house for a moment, looking at the place that had once been my sanctuary, the place that now felt like a prison. I didn't want to walk back through that door. It felt like stepping into the past. But I had to face it. I walked inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards beneath my feet the only sound in the otherwise silent house. Everything was exactly as it had been when I left, except it wasn't. The walls, the furniture, everything seemed to have lost its meaning. It was just stuff now. The life I thought I had wasn't there anymore. I took a deep breath and walked into the bedroom, the place where I had shared so many nights with Melanie. The bed was empty, the sheets still tangled, but it wasn't the same. It was just a bed now, nothing more. I sat down on the edge of the mattress and looked around. The truth was harsh and final, but it was also liberating. Melanie had left, and there was no bringing her back. But I wasn't going to stay stuck in this endless loop of hurt. I was going to move forward. It was time to stop living for someone who didn't care about me anymore. It was time to start living for myself. I stood up, walked over to the dresser, and grabbed a duffel bag. I wasn't sure where I was going, but it didn't matter. I needed a fresh start. I needed space, time to figure out who I was again. I grabbed a few things, some clothes, a couple of toiletries, and that was it. I didn't need anything else. I closed the bedroom door behind me and stepped out into the living room. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally taking control of my life. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was mine. And for the first time since Melanie left, I wasn't scared. I was ready. I closed the door behind me, the weight of the past finally lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small flicker of hope. I wasn't sure where I was going, but for the first time, I didn't need to know. All I knew was that I wasn't going to stay in the dark, drowning in my own sorrow. I was taking back control. I left the house, stepping out into the early morning air. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a golden hue across the city. It was beautiful in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. The world hadn't stopped turning, even if my life had felt like it had. There was still beauty, still possibility, still a chance for me to find a new path. I drove for hours, just letting the road take me where it wanted. I stopped at a small cafe for breakfast, sat outside with a cup of coffee, and watched the world go by. It was the first time in a long time I'd felt like I could breathe. There was no weight pressing down on me, no haunting thoughts about what had happened. It was just me, the open sky, and the road ahead. I didn't need to make any big decisions right then. I didn't need to know what the future held. For the first time, I was comfortable with the uncertainty. I was letting go of the past and embracing the freedom to create something new. I had a blank slate, and that was exactly what I needed. Over the next few weeks, I started putting the pieces of my life back together. I moved into a small apartment downtown, a place that felt like mine. I picked up old hobbies I had long abandoned: painting, running, cooking. I didn't have to do anything for anyone but myself anymore. And that felt like the greatest gift I could give myself. I spent time with friends, started meeting new people, and even began dating again, though I wasn't in any rush. The truth was, I had to rediscover who I was before I could share that with someone else. As the months went by, the pain faded. It never fully went away, but it became a part of me, something I had learned from, something that had made me stronger. I realized that my worth wasn't tied to Melanie, to our marriage, or to any other person. I had my own path to walk, my own life to live. And that life was mine to shape, however I wanted. One day, I stood on a hill overlooking the city at sunset, the sky painted in vibrant oranges and purples. I thought back to all the struggles, the heartache, and the loneliness. But I also thought about how far I had come. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, and I had done it for me. I wasn't perfect. I didn't have all the answers, and there would still be hard days ahead. But I was okay with that. I had learned that life wasn't about avoiding the pain or running from it. It was about embracing it, growing from it, and moving forward. I was no longer the man who was defined by the woman who left him. I was my own person, and that was enough. As I walked back to my car, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead was still uncertain, but that was okay. For the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to what was next. The past had shaped me, but it didn't own me. The future was mine to create, and I was ready for whatever it had in store.